Okay, so let me give you a quick introduction about myself, and then we will talk a bit more about CELPIP and IELTS and some of the similarities and differences between them. So some of you have heard of me, or I've been in a classroom where you've been in the past, and for some of you, you haven't. So I graduated many years ago, to more than 25 years ago, with a bachelor degree in culture and religion. And then I took my TESOL certification in 1998. I've taught over 1,500 high school and university students since 1998, both in other countries and here in Canada, in Winnipeg. And I took my master's to train strategies and knowledge to people who want to become English teachers, English as a second language teachers. So I graduated from that in 2017, and I've taught at the University of Winnipeg and another TESOL program to help new teachers learn about teaching English as a second language. I was at the U of M for 5 years with the English Language Center. I've been off and on at the University of Winnipeg, and I taught at Red River College and CLB levels 4 to 9. And from January till June, I don't have that on here, but I was teaching in the River East Transcona district with CLB 4-5 learners for those 6 months. I started teaching about CAN test, which is an academic English exam similar to TOEFL and IELTS in 2004. And then I started with strategies for TOEFL and IELTS shortly after. And then I started with CELPIP, which I don't have listed here, but I started teaching CELPIP in 2018. And for the last 20 some years, I've helped newcomers or international students settle into life in Canada, specifically here in Winnipeg, which is where I'm currently living. I've lived in several countries where I've taught English and also visited more. And I've helped teens and adults, not just with English, but also with finances, with settling, finding houses, starting a business, entrepreneurship, and other topics. So let's find out a bit more about you. So how many of you, and you can just raise your hand or put it in the chat, you don't have to answer verbally with all the questions, but how many of you, or why is your purpose for taking the CELPIP or IELTS? So how many of you are looking to get your Canadian PR? Okay, and you can just raise your hand or put it in the chat. Okay. And are there any of you that want to take IELTS or TOEFL for college or university? Okay. Okay, you do. Okay, great. Okay, so what you've heard from others or what you know about these, which exam have you heard is easier? Because there's always rumors and gossip and information out there.
I heard the CELPIP is easier. However, it's the question is flexible, and there is the less preparation documents than the IELTS test.
Okay, good. Those are all valid points. So yeah, there's less material. For some people or many people, they've found that it's easier. Okay. Okay. And Jeffrey, you have a question or at least a comment about Duolingo. I can talk about that towards the end, and we can talk about, because it was used for a while, but some universities have stopped using it. So I'll chat a bit more about that towards the end of this. Okay. And here's what I found, because I've taught hundreds of students specifically for both exams. I've taught, like I said, there are more than 1,500 in general with English and getting ready for university preparation. I've seen students try everything. I've had students take a CELPIP and then a month later take IELTS, and then a few weeks later take another exam, or study in, they were studying in an English program, then they switched to adult high school English, and then they switched back. There's lots of different options And what I've seen is CELPIP and IELTS have similarities and differences. And depending on your strength and weakness, I think that's what makes it, or seems to make CELPIP a bit easier, or IELTS a bit easier. So for some people, they've studied a lot about English in different countries, and they have knowledge about North America and Britain. So for them, maybe IELTS is easier because they can go on websites. For some people, if they've take CELPIP, but they've never been in Canada, they find it difficult because it's Canadian content and Canadian conversations. But for other people, they find CELPIP a little bit easier. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those as we go through. Okay. Have you visited the official websites for either exam? So either for CELPIP or for the IELTS? Okay, I see some heads going this way. Any heads going this way? So it's surprising to me, but I often ask students this question, and many times students have never looked at the IELTS. There's two IELTS websites that are official. One is from the British Council. The other one is the Canadian IELTS. And I can chat more about that in a question period. But those two websites give you the most up-to-date information. They also have study material, and they have some strategies or information about IELTS. For CELPIP, there's, and I'll share the link a little bit later. There's CELPIP.ca, which is from the so CELPIP was created along with an academic test called CAEL, CAEL, for immigration purposes and university entrance. The CAEL is for university entrance, and it's from the University of British Columbia originally. So that I'll be referring to their official website for some of this. Okay. And kind of we've answered with what do you know about CELPIP or IELTS? But I'm interested in this last question. How do you practice or prepare for the exam now? So what is it that you're doing to help you get ready for one of these exams?
To be honest, I'm stuck in the preparation, for the exam.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
You're stuck in what way? Like you've tried a little bit, or have you taken it before, or?
Before I ever took the IELTS exam, I found out after I did some IELTS test books, including
Yeah.
the practice exam. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
I couldn't improve my English level. Just by doing the book, the IELTS book.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a common approach. Most students I've talked with have said they look at practice exams, or they have IELTS preparation books or CELPIP, and they go through the exam, like they go through test after test after test. My philosophy with that, as well as with how we learn English in general, is that is an option, but it is a slower pathway. Because when you take the whole exam, or you're taking a whole section of questions, how do you know which ones you can answer easily and which ones you are a bit more difficult for you? And so what I recommend is understanding question types and strategies for the exam, whichever one you're taking, IELTS or CELPIP. And then from practicing strategies, you work on those specific areas to get faster or better in the listening, the reading, the writing. And then you take a practice exam maybe once every 2 weeks, because you practice strategies, then you take an exam and apply the strategies, and then you practice strategies, and then you take another exam. But I'll talk a little bit more of that a bit later as well. I'll just say one other thing. It's common everywhere I teach, and people from every country I've talked with, when I ask them, how do you improve your English listening? Most of them say, oh, I watch movies, I watch TV, I watch YouTube. And again, that is one way that many people practice and learn, but it's a slower method because it's passive. You're just listening. You're not understanding or applying or thinking about that information. And in a movie, when they're talking, they're going to say idioms and slang and information very quickly. So it's okay or good to watch movies and TV, but you also should go and have listening websites that are at different levels of difficulty with questions, because then you're listening actively, answering questions and practicing. And then as you're mastering that level, then you go to a higher level. And I have resources that I've shared with students for many years with that specifically. Okay, so let's get into the CELPIP versus the IELTS. What I'm going to do is break down and talk about the parts of the CELPIP and then the parts of the IELTS. And then after that, I'm going to show you some of the similarities and differences to help you make a decision or identify which might be better for you. Okay, so in general, just a broad overview, CELPIP has Canadian content. So the stories, the information are relevant or familiar of things happening in Canada, whether it's at a university setting, if it's at a shopping mall, if it's in a park. Sometimes they ask questions that might compare or say, what about if this is in a small town versus in a city? And so you have to be thinking, and what are the differences or similarities from those types of things? So again, if you've never been in Canada or in a Western country, some people struggle with that part of it. There's Canadian accents, and it's funny because many people say I don't have an accent or I have an easy to understand accent, but there are a few different accents across Canada in the East Coast, Toronto, the Prairies, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. There's an emphasis, and this is something that's maybe a new term or phrase, but there's an emphasis on communicative competence. What that means is many years ago, and in some countries today, they're trying to get you to speak perfectly in English. Here's the perfect accent. Here's the perfect grammar. Here's the perfect vocabulary. But that theory of teaching has changed in the last 15 or 20 years because English is spoken in so many countries. What is an English accent? Is it British? Is it Canadian? Is it Australian? Is it Nigerian? Is it Malaysian? All of those countries have English speakers with some different accents. So communicative competence means, can you explain your idea in a way that's understood? So maybe the grammar isn't perfect, or maybe you don't have the exact vocabulary word, but you're able to give the idea or explain your opinion or debate or respond to somebody's question. And as long as you can do that clearly, then you're going to be receive a score for that, even if you have grammar mistakes, even if you have some pronunciation problems. Okay. And this is one significant difference. You're going to take the whole exam one time, you sit down and you have the whole exam in 3 hours. And I'll explain a bit in the after this, but with IELTS, you have listening and reading and writing in one section, and then you have the speaking at a different time. It might be in the afternoon of that day or even the next day. But CELPIP is done all at once, all on the computer. And so that's one other area of difference. Okay, and these are taken from, like I said, the CELPIP.ca website. This is explaining about the CELPIP general exam. Okay, so let me go into a bit of detail with each skill area. So in reading, there's usually 4 passages. You have 8 to 11 questions in each passage. And so in total, there's 37, 38, 39 questions in 60 minutes, so in 1 hour. And you have multiple choice matching paragraphs, so information and paragraphs, and you have to identify which sentence matches which paragraph, and then short answer, or sometimes we call it fill in the blank. Okay. In each part, it's the same. Every CELPIP exam has the same 4 parts. So the first part will be correspondence, an email or interaction between people. The second part will be a diagram, a flyer, a menu, a website, an advertisement. And this is important because there's a strategy that I teach called skimming and scanning. Some students have practiced it, some have never heard of it, but it's looking for details of names, numbers, places. And so it's a strategy you can use for all of these parts, but it's most helpful in this middle section, part 2. In part 3, this is where it gets a little bit more difficult. You're going to be given a longer passage, and you're going to have questions where you're trying to understand that information. Probably it's a topic that you're not familiar with. And then part 4 is the hardest often. And because there's going to be an opinion given about 2 different viewpoints on a topic or a subject, and you'll hear somebody speaking about why they think one side is good, and then someone else speaking about the other side, and you're comparing or understanding or identifying answers of what's similar and different. And when they said, you know, this, what did they mean? When they said this, what were they trying to express? And sprinkled in part 3 and 4 are idioms and common expressions. So again, that's where some people may not be as familiar with some of those, and they just get confused in that section. Okay, in writing, you have an email, and you're given about 23 to 25 minutes. You have a maximum part to write, and it's on the computer, so you're typing this in to explain an email. I'll show you some examples shortly. But you're writing an email. Sometimes it's a complaint, sometimes it's a letter to a restaurant, or maybe an email to a friend describing something. In part 2, you're given a survey question. And so you're given a situation where it says, here are 2 choices, and you need to choose one option. And they're looking at how you explain your option in one essay format. So for example, it might say you're living in a small town, there's some green space, or there's a section in the center of town, and they either want to put in a shopping mall and restaurants, or they want to make a green park area with like an animal zoo or a petting zoo and a soccer field and different areas. Which do you think is better for your town? And then you explain why you choose one side and the other. The biggest mistake there is many times students write about both, but it's not asking for both. It's asking you to choose one side. Okay. Part 6, or sorry, listening is in 6 parts. And so again, you have about 38 questions, multiple choice, in about 1 hour. Again, the accent is Canadian and the focus is culture and tradition. So there's problem solving. So you're listening to 2 people talk and try to solve a problem that one person is having. There's daily life conversation. So 2 people meeting at the mall or in a store or on the street talking with each other. General information. There's a news item, but you're not seeing a video. So it's kind of like the news in the evening, but you're listening to what that news item is about. And then there's usually a video at the end, and again, with viewpoints. So you might have several people speaking and explaining one side of a conversation or the other. Okay. And then speaking, this is where I think there's the biggest difference between IELTS and CELPIP. So speaking has 8 distinct parts. I'll get my fingers in the camera. And you're responding on screen. So you have a headset with a mic, and you're answering these questions. Each question, you're given a time limit. So usually 30 to 60 seconds to read and think what you want to say, and then 60 seconds or 90 seconds where you're speaking. And students often have 2 problems in this section. One problem is, if you're in a small room with 20 or 30 other students, you're going to be hearing those students speaking even while you're speaking. So you have to be able to focus and concentrate on what you want to say. And then the second challenge for this section is students have difficulty giving an answer in a specific time. Anyone, and even for me as a Canadian, if I'm answering some of these questions, I need to have my introduction, some details and information in the middle, and a concluding sentence or a summary in 60 seconds. And that takes time to practice with that. So let me just show you some of the topics. So in part 1, you're giving advice. So that's always an area where They say, here, your friend asks you this question, what advice would you give them? So you're using specific phrases. In IELTS, they don't have this style. Like, you're not looking at specific phrases that might be common in Canada, but in CELPIP, that's what we're looking at, similar to our CLB levels. So giving advice. 2, you're talking about a personal experience. So tell me about a vacation you went on, or tell me about a time with your family, or something like that. In part 3, you're describing a scene. So you're given a picture, and you need to explain what's in that picture. And there again, you have to practice, because a lot of times students talk about a couple of parts of it, but you need to talk about everything that's in the picture in that minute or minute and a half. And then part 4, you're making a prediction. So you're taking the same picture, but you're explaining, what do you think will happen next? And you're being tested on talking about the future events, but also your analytical ideas, your logical thinking. When you see this thing, what would happen in 5 minutes after this, or in 1 hour after this? Okay. Task 5, you're comparing 2 items and trying to persuade someone why your choice is best. Number 6, you have a situation that you're trying to deal with that's a big problem in your life. In 7, you're talking about an opinion, a little bit easier. And then 8, they show you a picture that's really strange, and they want you to describe it. And sometimes students have difficulty because of lack of vocabulary or understanding. So I'm going to actually just switch. I want to show you samples of each of these questions, because again, this is one area that is the biggest difference between IELTS and CELPIP. Okay, so here you can see how it would look on the computer screen. So you can see at the top that you're given 30 seconds to prepare, 90 seconds to give your answer. And here's a situation. A friend is looking for a summer job. Advise ways that he can find work for the summer. Okay, that's a very Canadian thing for teenagers, young adults, people in college, etc. Okay, number 2, 30 seconds to prepare, 60 seconds to speak and talk about a personal experience. So like I said, a great time you had with a family member or friend, something at school, a time you traveled. So you have 30 seconds to kind of organize your ideas, and then you want to respond and talk about that. But when the timer ends at 60 seconds, that's it. Even if you're 3/4 of the way, you still have some other things to say. They just stop the recording, and you're only given a score based on that recording length. Okay. So in part 3, like I said, you're describing a scene. Sorry, let me see if I can get it on the screen here a bit clearer. Okay. So here, this specific picture, you see a classroom, and you have to describe what's happening. Now, I can't talk one by one. I don't have enough time to speak about all 14 or 15 students and teachers and principal that's in the class, but I want to give some general comments about a couple of students. What are they doing in the bottom left-hand corner, the bottom right-hand corner, at the front of the class, the teacher, who's the teacher talking to, etc. Okay, and you're given 30 seconds to glance at the picture, 60 seconds to speak about it. And then in part 4, you're given the same picture as I said, but you're going to say what will most probably happen next. So typically in this specific picture, the teacher will come back into the classroom, but then what will happen? And so you kind of talk about those different parts again. You know, in the bottom left-hand corner, they'll put away the video game. The bottom right-hand corner, the 2 girls will stop talking. You know, maybe the boys or the children at the front of the class will go sit down, etc. Okay. Task 5. So here, you're given an option about moving, and you found 2 different houses. So you're going to look at you're going to explain one of these that you think is best for your family and why you like it. So you have, again, 60 seconds to prepare. And so here's 2 choices. They give you some details about the houses. So you see price, you see the size of it, how large the size, how many bedrooms, bathrooms, where it's located. Okay, and you check one of those choices. Then you're going to take that choice and they give you a third choice, and you're going to explain why the choice you had is better than this choice. So for example, here it's cheaper, but it's further outside of the town. It's a little bit smaller. So we're testing your ability to identify information and then explain options and using transition signals and information between these options. Difficult situation. So in this case, a cousin is coming to visit you. They want to live with you, but your roommate does not want your cousin to move in with you. So then you're given two choices. Talk to your cousin and say why she can't move in with you, or talk to your roommate and explain why the cousin should live with you for that year. Again, you can't talk about, well, you're not supposed to talk about both. You're kind of wasting your time. You choose one and explain why that is a good choice. Okay, express opinions. So this could be on any topic. So this one is about adults paying rent to their children if they're still living at home after age 21. 30 seconds to think, 90 seconds to respond. And then here's an unusual situation or picture. So you see this table, and you're supposed to phone a friend or a family member and explain or talk about what do you see in that table. Okay, so let me just pause there. Any questions that you have with the speaking? Because like I said, this is where there's the biggest change and difference and challenge for speakers. Okay. Any questions from what you saw in that information?
May I ask you? If the speaking test with a real man or just recording? For example, when I pass IELTS, speaking section was with a real man.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's where it's just the recording. So there's, I'll show you at the very end of this, but that's where there's most people like it or they don't like it. Because with IELTS, as you experienced, as you're speaking, that person can interact with you. They can ask a follow-up question. They can kind of, like when I did IELTS speaking exams, I could interact and adjust my questions to the person's difficulty level. With CELPIP, there's no one around. You have a headphone and a mic, and you're given that time limit, and you can see the little bar running across when the time stops, like you have prep time, so 30 seconds to read the question. Then it stops and it says now start speaking or now recording begins. Then you have the 60 seconds. So you're watching that bar go across, and when it stops, they just take you to the next question. So that's where the challenge is for some people. Do you speak to a computer in that time limit or to a real person? Good. Any other questions with parts of these? Okay, so let me jump back into this, and let's just talk quickly. I think most people are a little bit more familiar with IELTS, so I'll go through this a little bit quicker, and then we'll talk in more detail towards the end. So IELTS has multiple accents, and so it could be from the British Isles, they call it, or the Commonwealth or the United Kingdom, where you'd have British, Irish, or Scottish accents, Canadian, US, New Zealand, and or Australian. So you have a variety of different accents that may be spoken during the listening part. As I mentioned earlier, you start usually and you have 2 hours and 45 minutes. So you have the listening, reading, and writing that you do all in one time. Then you're allowed to take a break, and then you have a schedule when your speaking is. So it might be, so usually from 9 to 11:45 is the IELTS reading, listening, writing. And then in the afternoon, it is, you given a schedule every 20 minutes or so. So you might be at 1 o'clock, you might be at 2:20, you might be at 2:40, at 3 o'clock, or in some cases, even the following day. Okay. I'll go through this picture in more detail with the points. So reading is usually 3 passages with 8 to 11 questions, so similar. but there's one passage that usually has two different parts. So that's where it still ends up with 40 questions in 60 minutes. So it's the same as the CELPIP from that. Okay, yeah, and there's a question, Jeffrey, about getting the PowerPoint. Yes, at the end of this, I'll share my email and my WhatsApp and WeChat information, and I'll be sending out a recording and the PowerPoint so that people can see this, definitely, because it's a lot of information in a short time. Okay, question types are multiple choice, matching, and fill in the blank short answer. So that was similar to the CELPIP, but there's also a style called true, false, and not given. True, false is generally a little bit easier, but having that not given option, that's question type is where some students struggle in the reading section. Okay. In writing general, because in IELTS you have general and academic, general for immigration purposes, academic for university college. So in the general, you have a complaint letter, so similar to CELPIP, and then you're writing an essay, and typically the essay is one of three types. It's an opinion essay, you know, should teenagers work part-time while they're in high school? It's an agree or disagree or compare contrast or disadvantage and advantages essay, where you're talking about what you think is different and similar between 2 points. Or it's a problem and solution. So in the world today, we have a lack of water. There's only, 1% or 3% of water that's drinkable. How do we solve this problem? And you have to, the organization for all these is the same: introduction, body paragraphs, and conclusion, but it could be in three different ways, and how you join your ideas together is slightly different. So 60 minutes in total. So all very similar to the CELPIP. And as was mentioned at the start of this webinar, there's lots of material on IELTS on the internet. There's lots of analyzing what types of questions, what themes, what topics. So common themes that they have are in education, environment, art, business, technology, family, health, language. There's usually, well, I've seen about 10 to 12 general themes, and then your writing, reading, listening topics are usually within those themes. Okay, and this was taken from a website that I recommend called IELTS Liz. There's hundreds of websites, but there's three websites that I always refer learners to. There's IELTS Advantage, IELTS Liz, and IELTSblog.com. And again, I'll share those with everyone later. Okay, listening is very similar, 4 parts. But here it's only 30 minutes. If you remember from CELPIP, the CELPIP could be up to 1 hour, 50 minutes, 55 minutes. With the listening, you have 4 sections. So the first, you have 2 people speaking. The second, you have 1 person talking, and they're in a setting, maybe asking questions or commenting on something. In the third section, you have 2, 3, or 4 people talking in an educational setting. So it might be a student talking to a librarian. It might be some discussion in the cafeteria. It might be a professor with a student or several students in a classroom. And then the fourth part is often the hardest. It's a monologue. So again, 1 person speaking on something academic, maybe global warming, maybe about polar bears, maybe about something in history. Here's again the differences. So IELTS has 3 parts. In part 1, there's general social information. Tell me, do you work or do you go to school? Tell me about your family. Tell me about, similarities between Canada or this country and other countries. Tell me about weddings from your country of origin. Tell me about cultural events, tourist places. The focus here is to help you relax. Because when you're sitting down face to face with someone, we're talking about these different areas. And so our job as an IELTS examiner, we want you to kind of just take a breath and speak about things that are comfortable for you. Part 2 is similar to CELPIP, where you have 1 minute to read a question. So for example, talk about a place that's popular for tourists in your country. Tell us where the place is, why people like going there, have you visited there? So it's a question with a couple of sub-questions. and then you're given 1 to 2 minutes to respond. And based on how long you talk there, that gives us an understanding of your ability to explain things in a short, focused way. So, because I have some students that they talk and then they go off topic and they talk about, lots of things. Other students are quite clear and they speak for about 1.5 to 2 minutes. I can tell they've practiced and answered things in a good order. And then part 3 is follow up about that part 2 topic, but also then we ask other questions and we're trying to listen to your opinion. And then can you discuss your response to things? So for example, are leaders born or are leaders trained or skills that they learn? Or when tourists visit a place, how much does that hurt the environment? And how can we solve environmental issues on our tourist beaches or tourist attractions? So there you're discussing, maybe justifying or responding. Articulate is just a fancy word, an academic word for explaining your idea clearly in that way. Okay. So let's just look a little bit, and some of these we've mentioned now in the last few minutes, but CELPIP, you're speaking to a computer and you have a time limit for each question. And again, that's where without practice, like if you just go in without any practice, you'll probably struggle in that area. If you do practice a little bit, then it is a bit easier. You're not having to worry about spelling, and that's something that, so I have some students that I teach and they're very low level with spelling, especially I see for some that have, if their language or spelling system is very different than English. So, Arabic is one, some languages from Africa or parts of Asia. And then when they're trying to spell in English, they're often spelling it wrong. But in CELPIP, they actually have a spell checker as you're writing. So you don't have to worry about the spelling. Again, it's Canadian content. And as I kind of mentioned a bit earlier, we're looking at how would a Canadian person respond in these contexts? So how would you explain your opinion? How would you say something politely? When do you use formal language, informal language? So as you get to like CELPIP or the CLB 5, 6, 7, the higher numbers, moving up to 9 for college or university, we're looking and analyzing how your information is similar to how a Canadian or a person who grew up in Canada would respond in those situations. Okay. IELTS, speak with a person. There's general information and academic information on many topics. And as was mentioned, lots of websites to practice from. And I find it's easier to use strategies. So with both CELPIP and IELTS, I teach how to look at your answers and then eliminate an answer that's clearly wrong. But in IELTS, if you're not sure about the information or the vocabulary or the passage, you can still usually use 2 or 3 different strategies to narrow down or find the right answer. It's a bit harder in CELPIP because as you get to higher levels, because there's some ideas or concepts that are more abstract, or maybe it's idioms that you've never heard of before. And so that's also, with getting a CELPIP score of 5 or 6, maybe it's not as much of a problem, but if you're trying to take CELPIP for level 9 or 8 or 9, then that may be an area that you'll struggle with not having as many strategies to use. Okay. So, so let me just pause there, and because I want to wrap this up in about a 1 hour time. Any questions that you have for me or that you've thought of during this part or from before? Anything about how do you do something? Is it best to do this or do that? Anything about what do you think? You can type in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask me these questions. Okay, yeah, good question. Which test do you think is easier for writing? So the nice thing is for CELPIP and general, or sorry, CELPIP and then IELTS general, the writing section is almost the same. You're writing an email or a correspondence. Sometimes it's a complaint or describing information. In CELPIP, in IELTS, the writing is a complaint letter. So you're given a situation that you have to explain why you weren't happy or not satisfied with something. And then the essay format. If you're trying to score high, well, if you're needing the score for permanent residency, I would say they're both similar. You just need to understand the format of writing a complaint letter and the format for writing the essay and practice both of those. But if you're writing for university level, and so you need IELTS 6.5 or you need a CELPIP 8 or 9, depending on the program, then I think IELTS is slightly easier, again, because there's much more material and more instructors and people explaining how do you write those different parts. That's a good question. Okay, other questions?
I have a question. I heard that IELTS and CELPIP has a different score. I mean that in IELTS you have score on each section, and CELPIP I think have score average of them. Yeah, am I
Okay.
right? Or maybe something else, something wrong.
Yeah, no, let me just, I'll write that out here. Okay, so for the immigration purposes, they're looking to see that you've made a certain level, and we call these your band score. I should probably change that around, but so I'll say IELTS band score or your CELPIP score. So so in IELTS, they have it in half points up to a 9. In CELPIP, they have up to a 12. Okay. For immigration purposes, and I can bring us to a website shortly, but for immigration purposes, you're looking to get a 4.5. Sorry, let me just. What I'll do is I'll go to the government website here and I'll pull it up just so that I'm not giving the wrong numbers within it. Because they did change these a while back, and I just want to make sure. So let me just stop sharing this, and I'm going to share the. Okay, so this is from the Government of Canada website, and you can see here the different tests they accept, which is CELPIP IELTS. By the way, they are going to accept one more test, but they haven't officially organized that yet. But there will be one more test that they're going to start accepting either in the fall of 2023, like this fall, or next winter. So I'll keep everyone updated when they add that third test to this. Okay. So let me just see with. Okay, so IELTS. So let's go to the CELPIP website. See, they're talking, the reason I'm looking because they're talking here about 7, but then they also have 5, or well, 4 or higher for citizenship. So maybe I should say it in this way. When you're looking at your point system, the higher you're getting in that area, the better it is. So you could have a 7 in one and 8 in another, to get higher points. But I'm just looking because I know there's other mocks. Yeah, let me do one more search. Okay, so they're just showing the equivalency. Yeah, so that's where they had made some changes. Okay, so maybe what I'll do is I'll find the exact information because I know they were talking about different points. But they're usually looking to get I think it's a 4.5 in your reading and listening and a 5 in writing and speaking. But I want to confirm that before I give you that exact information. Yeah, so okay, so 5 or higher, they're saying, so they're not necessarily taking an average about that. Okay, but I'll confirm that and send out that information in an email. Okay. Any other questions from this?
Oh, I have one question. Yeah, just
Yeah.
now you mentioned, yeah, the speaking, yeah, test, in IELTS test. Yeah, for example, there are 2 students. They have the similar English level. Yeah, the students A talked a lot. However, most of the conversation, yeah, is off the topic. For example, part 2. Yeah,
Yeah.
the students B, yeah, directly answered the question, yeah, about the talk 2, about the part 2. Yeah, will the students B got a much higher score than the students A?
Yes, and I'll show you why here. Let me bring this up. So yeah, okay. So let me share a chart with this information. And this is, I'll show you from CELPIP as well as from IELTS. One area, and I think this is where having a teacher or someone who's knowledgeable is useful. When we're looking at speaking and writing, there's specific ideas or information we're looking for when you're answering a question. So in most of our academic studies, the focus has been on getting correct grammar, getting correct vocabulary, spelling your words right, etc. But when we're looking at an overall ability of speaking, and I had this situation with a student in my January to June CLB 4-5 class. She expected and wanted to be given a CLB 5 score, and one of her friends did achieve a CLB 5 score in 8 different assessments or activities, but I didn't give a CLB score to her because she only had 6 different activities where she had that, and some of those she just barely got the minimum requirements, because I'm looking at on an overall picture. Is it vocabulary, but also how she's answering, her familiarity, the pauses, the ums and ahs, pronunciation. There's a lot of different things we're looking at. So in CELPIP, it identifies here with a speaking score. And let me just go down. Let's just choose a level 6. And so when people are responding, we're looking at multiple areas. So what you mentioned earlier is about the content. So if somebody's off topic, they're able to speak, but they're not talking or responding to the question I asked them. They're going to get a lower score in the content because they're not responding to my information.
Thank you.
And then, so for example, at a CLB 6, they can give factual information, details, numbers, and ideas that is common in a familiar sense. But if so, going to the shopping, talking to their friend on the street, but if I put them in a different setting that they're not familiar with, they're going to struggle. We're also looking at vocabulary and then something which they call listenability. So how easy it is to understand. Because if I say to you, I have a barn red, you're like, okay, but I take a second to pause because it's a red barn. I'm putting the adjective after the noun instead of before. So I understand it, but it takes me that split second for my brain to process what someone just said. And that's where when somebody has grammar mistakes, pronunciation mistakes, or other difficulties using the wrong word, we can understand it. We can listen and comprehend. But is it smooth to do that, or are we pausing and thinking more in order to respond? Okay, rhythm, pronunciation, intonation, those types of things. But my point with this, and then task fulfillment, this also relates to, did they explain and talk in a way? So if they're persuading a friend to take a job, it's not just the words, but also a friendly tone, a helpful tone, because you might hear somebody say, okay, first you need to go downtown to go to the job office, then go find that. And it sounds very demanding, very strict. And maybe the person's just nervous. But the tone, when I'm giving advice to a friend, oh, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I suggest you. So that's not something that's identified in IELTS that it is in CELPIP, but it shows us, oh, in this context, how would I be speaking friendly, helpful, informally? That's all taken into account. And I won't take time to show you the IELTS, but IELTS is the same. There's 4 different categories we're looking at for writing and speaking. And then in each category, we have a grid. And many times students have never seen those charts. So I always share that information with students as well, because if you don't know what we're looking for as teachers, how do you know if you've hit that goal or not? So it's good to understand and you don't have to understand all 9 levels in IELTS or 12 levels in CELPIP. It's best just to look at and say, okay, I need to see a CELPIP 5 or maybe a 6. So then look at what's a 4, a 5, and a 6. Or in IELTS, I need to get a 6.5 for college. Okay, look at what's a 5, look at what's a 6, look at what's a 7, and understand why your essay. So I'll just go off track here a bit, but I have many, many students that are pharmacists, doctors. They're knowledgeable, excellent in most areas of English, and they can't pass the writing. So I've had some students, they've taken the IELTS or CELPIP 3 or 4 or 5 times, and they're good they're passing most areas, but writing is always a factor. And so I asked them, like I asked you, how are you practicing? Well, I'm just writing essays. I said, that's fine, but how do you know if you're improving or what areas? So then I take them through an exercise that I teach on, look at it from a teacher's perspective. We're the ones reading your essay or a complaint letter. So what are we looking for based on these charts and this information? Then start practicing writing that information because I often have students that say, well, I'll just memorize 5 different essays, and then hopefully I get that essay on the exam. Again, maybe, but that's a long, long process. Why not understand the structure of an essay or a complaint letter And then any topic you're given, you can always put it into that structure. It's a faster, simpler process for that. Okay, I'm just going to go to the chat because I see there's another. Yeah, tons of idioms or slang can help us get a higher score in the speaking test. So I'll speak about each individually. In IELTS, it is a very small factor. So maybe 5% of your total score in IELTS speaking would be if you're using idioms and slang. So just adding a lot of that is not the key, because in IELTS you have your content, you have vocabulary, you have pronunciation, and then you have your grammar, range, and accuracy. So what's more helpful, so if, let's say I have 10 hours of study, would I spend 10 hours on idioms and slang? No, what I would spend 10 hours on is writing and speaking more complex sentences, because many times students write in short, simple sentences. The next level is adding compound sentences, and, or, but, however. The third and higher level is adding complex sentences. Trevor is a teacher. Trevor is sick. Two very simple sentences. Trevor, who is my teacher, is sick today. Now it's a complex sentence. So improve your overall speaking and writing of complexity will be more useful. If some people love idioms or they're focused on certain things, so maybe every day you learn 2 idioms or 3 idioms, no problem. But when you, let's say you have 2 or 3 months preparing for an exam, there's specific strategies that I would guide students through that are much more effective, and you're not kind of wasting time. You know, like I said earlier, I could watch movies for 4 hours a week, or I could spend 2 hours practicing specific speaking and listening strategies that would jump my mark up in a much higher way over a month or 2 months of doing that regularly.
Oh, that is complicated. The grammar is key.
Grammar,
Yeah,
in
as
how
if, for example.
yeah, like how complex it is. But
Oh.
even at higher levels, there will be minor grammar mistakes. So as an IELTS 7, you may still have a couple of articles like or the wrong, or you might use a verb tense wrong once or twice. But when there's multiple errors, so that's where, yeah, it's kind of, okay, make sure your grammar generally is good, but then get more complexity in your speaking, in your grammar for CELPIP or IELTS. That will help raise, because it shows more understanding of the English language.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions that you've thought of? Okay, so let me just go back to the PowerPoint for a couple of minutes. Okay, I saw another, yeah, okay. So let me just talk about your, you know, what are your options? So what I recommend for everyone is to take a practice IELTS or CELPIP exam. You can go to the official website, or I also offer a listening, reading, and writing practice exam where I give you some feedback for that. And then there's tons of free information. So on IELTS and CELPIP, they always encourage you to buy their books, like the CELPIP book, the IELTS book. I don't think that's necessary in today's world, just because you can go to the library and they have the same CELPIP and IELTS books. Maybe some of them are written in, maybe not. You can also watch tons and tons of YouTube videos from many, like there's probably thousands and thousands of hours of information. And same with the websites, YouTube and websites. The key is which websites and which teachers are you listening to? So like I said, I've taught this for many years. I also have other teachers that I recommend people go to their websites, because I know that they're good and they've had a great success with students, and just narrow it down to a couple of main people that you're listening or watching. Okay. One thing I do that's different from other teachers is I offer a class that starts with strategies, because reading and listening especially, but with all 4 of them, 4 skills as you saw today, it doesn't matter to me if you're taking CELPIP or IELTS, you need to start with the same strategies or put it another way, the same strategies are useful for both exams. So skimming and scanning, logical thinking, organization of an essay, listening practice, speaking in complete sentences, speaking and responding in a paragraph, giving your opinions. It doesn't matter which test you're taking. So rather than me teach the same thing to students taking CELPIP and to students taking IELTS, what I do is I combine it in a 10-hour class and say, okay, here's your basic strategies. And often during that class time, students will come to me and say, Mr. Trevor, this isn't IELTS. I say, no, it's not IELTS questions. It's strategies that you have to get stronger on and faster. And then I take them, once they've practiced it for a few weeks or a month or two, then I take them and say, okay, see question number 3, that was reading strategy 2 that we practiced. See question number 5, that was reading strategy number 4 that we practiced. So it's like sports. You're not just going to go and shoot a basketball every day and be good in overall basketball. In basketball, you pass the ball, you shoot the ball, you dribble the ball. You need to have short sprints and energy. You need to have good cardiovascular to run for the whole hour. There's specific areas with each skill that you practice, and then the coach puts those skills together. So that's similar to what I do with that 10-hour class. And then I have then a 30-hour class with specific strategies for CELPIP and 30 hours specific strategies for IELTS. And then we hone down and practice the strategies we've used earlier to really get in and practice in that area. Or as I mentioned, I've had many students that really struggle with just one area. Maybe it's the speaking, maybe it's the writing. Those are the 2 most common. But I can then give feedback and information on just that area. So some students say, okay, I don't need a whole course, but I need to improve my writing. Right now I'm at a 5.5. I need to get to a 6 or a 6.5. So then we spend a few weeks and I show them the strategies, which are the same strategies I teach in the 10 hours, but it's just in that one area then, not all 4 areas. Okay. So here's my email, which I can put this information into the chat. I'm on WhatsApp. I'm also on WeChat, for those of you that are more familiar with those platforms. And so feel free to send me an email. If you have friends or you know of other people who are interested in IELTS or CELPIP, typically what I do is I gather together 5 to 8 students. I go through these different strategies and information, but I'm also giving some one-on-one time to each of those students. So you're in a small group, because I don't need to spend 10 hours, like an hour with 10 students explaining the same strategies one by one. So I explain the general strategies to everyone. You go and practice them during the week, but then I also give specific feedback to what you're doing and reviewing within that. So that's some options for you. I'll stick around for another if there's any other questions, but I appreciate that you joined today. I am giving the same information and webinar on Monday night at 7 p.m. So if you have friends or others that you know, even in other cities or countries, that you found this helpful and you think that they should also know about it, feel free to share that. But it'll be Monday at 7 p.m. in Winnipeg time or Central time. And the same link and most of the same information, but there'll probably be different questions that students ask as well. Okay, so yeah, be in touch with me, even just to check in and say, hey, I'm doing this. What do you think about this strategy or that information? I'm always happy to help people, whether it's with advice or to help them get ready and pass the CELPIP or the IELTS.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
thank you a lot. Have a nice day.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you guys joining us.